The road to every completed Star Wars movie is paved with the corpses of abandoned story ideas, unused characters, or even entire projects that failed at some point during the creative process. And that's because making movies is incredibly difficult, and with a machine as big as Star Wars, the whole thing instantly becomes 100 times more complicated. With that in mind then, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 failed Star Wars movies and why they didn't happen. Number 10. Star Wars Episode 9 Duel of the Fates. The ninth installment of the Skywalker saga was originally going to be helmed by Jurassic World director Colin Trevorrow. In 2016, he co-wrote a script titled Duel of the Fates with regular collaborator Derek Connolly, which ended up leaking online in January 2020, revealing that Trevorrow's vision was radically different from the Episode 9 that we ultimately did get. See, Duel of the Fates would have included a lot more of Rose Tico, a lot less of Emperor Palpatine, none of him in fact, and would have revealed that Rey's last name is Solana, ending the movie with her vowing to train children in the ways of the Force. We would have also seen the Force ghosts of Yoda, Luke, and Obi-Wan in the same frame, which would have been an incredible moment to experience in a packed theater. However, Trevorrow left the project in 2017 for reasons unknown. The official statement was that he and Lucasfilm had creative differences, but it was suspected that the real reason was the critical and commercial failure of his movie, The Book of Henry, which released mere months before he exited Episode 9. Of course, ultimately, Episode 7 director J.J. Abrams was soon hired as Trevorrow's replacement, and Duel of the Fates was discarded in favor of a new script. This was viewed as a big win at the time, but in hindsight, well, let me know what you think in the comments. Number 9. Wookie and Droid solo movies. When George Lucas was in the midst of crafting his original trilogy, he wasn't just thinking about the main episodic films. No. At one point, he was actually considering developing 2 spin-off flicks, one focused on Wookiees and one focused on droids. Now, little is known about these projects, because it's clear that Lucas didn't really get very far along with them at all. He said, quote, "I came up with some ideas for a film about droids with no humans in it," and later on said he also thought of a film just about Wookiees, nothing else. Basically, he had these loose ideas in his head, and that's about as far as each concept got. That said, it is possible that he gave some of his ideas to the teams that made the animated Droids and Ewok shows, and maybe some of his Wookiee ideas made it into the disastrous Star Wars Holiday Special. And if that is the case, we definitely dodged a blaster shot here. Number 8. George Lucas's sequel trilogy. In 1978, it was reported that Lucas was planning a dozen Star Wars movies in total. In subsequent interviews, this would be dropped down to 9, but either way, it was clear that he was one day planning to make some direct follow-ups to his original trilogy. Had Lucas actually got to make Episodes 7, 8, and 9, he was reportedly planning to explore Luke's life as a Jedi, while also introducing Luke's sister, who in this early iteration wouldn't be Leia in the middle chapter. Some of his more up-to-date plans, though, included Darth Maul being the main villain, along with his apprentice Darth Talon, Leia being the main character, and Luke attempting to kickstart a new generation of Jedi. This, tragically, would never happen, of course, as in the early 2010s, Disney CEO Bob Iger expressed interest in acquiring Lucasfilm. George Lucas was initially hesitant, but ultimately he relented, and though he did hand over his outlines for the sequel trilogy, Iger stressed that Disney would have final say over the direction of the franchise. Under no obligation to use Lucas's treatments, Disney forged its own sequel trilogy path, a decision that reportedly left Lucas feeling a little bit betrayed. Number 7. Splinter of the Mind's Eye. As is the case with most big movies, the original Star Wars film got its very own novelization. Ghostwritten by Alan Dean Foster and credited to George Lucas, Star Wars From the Adventures of Luke Skywalker was published in November 1976, but this wasn't the only Star Wars book Foster was contracted to produce. See, Lucas also tasked him with writing a second book, which ultimately became Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which is an absolutely incredible name for anything. I'm going to order this book right now. Anyway, tangent aside, this was something of a backup plan on Lucas's part, because the intent was for this story to act as a low-budget sequel to Star Wars, basically if the first film flopped. Then Splinter of the Mind's Eye was designed to be a smaller stripped-back follow-up, which could be adapted to the screen for a relatively low cost. The plot of the novel follows Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia as they crash land on the swamp planet Mimban. Here, the pair seek out the powerful and mysterious Kyber crystal, which was spelt different to how it would later be spelled, while Luke squares off against Darth Vader and ends up chopping off his arm. Though Lucas initially wasn't confident that Star Wars would resonate with audiences, it quickly began breaking box office records almost as soon as it was released in May 1977. With this success in mind, then there was simply no need for Splinter of the Mind's Eye to be turned into a movie, as Lucas was free to produce his preferred, more big-budget Star Wars sequel, which of course led to The Empire Strikes Back in 1980. Number 6. The Rian Johnson Trilogy. A month before the release of his Skywalker Saga entry, Star Wars The Last Jedi, it was revealed that Rian Johnson would create a brand new Star Wars trilogy with his longtime producing partner Ram Bergman. The trilogy was said to be separate from the main episodic movies and would introduce fresh characters from a part of the galaxy that Star Wars had, quote, never before explored. Sadly, little else is known about what Johnson had planned, although we did hear that he was slated to write and direct only the first installment, opening up the possibility for some new voices to tackle the two films afterwards. Though Johnson's trilogy has never been outwardly cancelled, there has been no significant forward movement on it since it was announced way back when. The parties involved have occasionally reiterated that it is still happening, but these feel like attempts to save face rather than serious commitments to the project. It is possible that the divided response to The Last Jedi put Johnson's future Star Wars efforts on the back burner, but to be fair, his work on the Knives Out franchise has kept him incredibly busy over the last few years, so it could just be a simple case of not having enough time to do everything. Number 5. The Obi-Wan Kenobi solo movie. When Disney acquired Lucasfilm in 2012, the studio understandably wanted to get as much out of its investment as possible. And to that end, it was soon announced that spin-off films centered on Han Solo and Boba Fett were in early development. A few years later, and Star Wars fans rejoiced at the news that Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi would also be joining this cinematic spin-off party, with Oscar-nominated director Stephen Daldry in talks to oversee the project. The film's story was rumored to involve Obi-Wan watching over Luke Skywalker on Tatooine, only for him to come out of hiding amidst rising tensions between a group of local farmers and a tribe of Tusken Raiders. After the financial failure of Solo, a Star Wars story though, Lucasfilm and Disney pumped the brakes on their standalone Star Wars movies, which also, tragically, included Obi-Wan. On the plus side though, it wasn't a straight-up cancellation, it was more of a rework. As you have probably guessed, Obi-Wan Kenobi was instead built as a Disney Plus series, with certain elements being taken from the movie pitch and adapted into this new small-screen take. Number 4. The Boba Fett solo movie. As mentioned, a Boba Fett solo movie was in the works in 2013. Reportedly, it was set to take place either between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, or The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and would have featured Fett alongside some of the other bounty hunters that we saw in Episode 5. Story aside, the most exciting thing about this project was the talent involved, with Chronicle helmer Josh Trank initially being hired to direct before 310 to Yuma and Logan mastermind James Mangold took the reins in 2018. As mentioned, the Boba Fett movie suffered the same fate as its Obi-Wan counterpart, with Solo's box office disappointment prompting Disney and Lucasfilm to reevaluate their movie strategy. Disney Plus became the focus instead, and an entirely new Boba story was developed for the small screen, with the character last being seen in the 7-part series The Book of Boba Fett earlier this year. Number 3. Mos Eisley's Spaceport, a Star Wars story. Yeah, you heard this right. Amidst its mad rush to develop an entire slate of Star Wars spin-offs, Making Star Wars reported that Disney was once considering a movie about, quote, the spaceport that Luke Skywalker goes into in the original film, end quote, which was given the unofficial title of Mos Eisley's Spaceport, a Star Wars story. Absolutely no details about this project have surfaced over the years, and it's difficult to even speculate what such a movie could revolve around. Maybe it would have been like Steven Spielberg's The Terminal, but set in space? Who knows? To put it mildly, this doesn't sound like the strongest of movie ideas. In the same report, which was published in June 2018, Making Star Wars noted that a Star Wars project had recently cancelled its studio space at Pinewood, and that this project was the Mos Eisley Spaceport movie. But again, it doesn't take a wise, all-knowing Jedi to see that a Mos Eisley Spaceport movie doesn't really sound like a smart move to make, so we find it hard to believe that there was ever a serious chance of this one happening. Number 2, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss's Trilogy. The pop culture dominance and award success of Game of Thrones catapulted David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, the show's creators and lead writers, to the top of every movie studio's wishlist, and in 2018, it was Disney that managed to snag them. In February of that year, news broke that the duo had signed on to write and produce a series of Star Wars films, later revealed to be a trilogy, that was intended to be separate from the Rian Johnson trilogy. Little is known about what they would have done with the Star Wars IP, but it's possible that those political machinations, mature themes, and other elements of Game of Thrones' DNA would have formed part of their vision. However, in October 2019, the creators exited their Star Wars deal, as a few months prior, they'd signed another major content deal over at Netflix, and this was cited as their reason for walking far, far away from the Star Wars galaxy. They said, quote, "There are only so many hours in the day, and we felt like we could not do justice to both Star Wars and our Netflix projects, so we are regretfully stepping away," end quote. Number 1, Zack Snyder's Star Wars. In early 2013, Vulture reported that none other than Zack Snyder was developing a Star Wars project, which was intended to be set sometime after Episode 6, though separate from the then-in-development sequel trilogy. Snyder's vision was described as a Jedi epic that took cues from Akira Kurosawa's 1954 classic Seven Samurai, only with the titular samurai and their swords being replaced with Force users and lightsabers. The validity of Vulture's report was soon challenged by The Hollywood Reporter, but the outlet stood by its scoop, claiming that Snyder had recently met with Lucasfilm executives about the project. And in the end, Vulture was proven right, though it did take a rather long time for the truth to be revealed. In 2021, Snyder confirmed that he had indeed worked on a Star Wars movie, but that it was before Lucasfilm was bought by Disney. He said that they talked about it, but it never happened, indicating that the project simply lost steam before those early discussions had concluded. In a strange way though, Snyder is actually finally getting to make his Star Wars movie with the upcoming Rebel Moon, which is an epic space opera about an underdog colony rebelling against a tyrannical empire, which definitely doesn't sound familiar, does it? So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Would you have loved to have seen any of these Star Wars movies, or are you pleased they got cancelled? Let us know, and while you're down there, could you also please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to What Culture Star Wars for more lists like this on the regular. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.